I wanted to hold off this video until after I experienced the DLC for Elden Ring. And after playing this massive expansion, as well as the base game several times, I 100% stand behind my following next words. Elden Ring is the greatest game of all times and no other game comes close to it. Now, this will very likely lead to many comments from fellow gamers disagreeing with me and pointing out that instead game XYZ is the greatest of all times. But are they right? And how do we even begin to define what makes a game the greatest of all time? You see, the problem with finding a universally agreed upon title is the emotional connection we form when we play a game, which then plays a massive role in shaping our personal opinion on the greatest of all time. The cause for this can be explained by a psychological concept known as emotional conditioning or associative learning, which in its simplest definition means that through repeated associations via different circumstances, our emotional response becomes linked to an experience like playing a particular game. And in the context of gaming, several psychological factors contribute to this deep emotional bonding process. One of these factors being the classical conditioning process. It is similar to Pavlov's dogs in regards to that certain emotions like happiness, comfort, etc. become linked with playing games. Especially if these games are repeatedly played during positive moments, like playing with friends any split-screen game in your childhood. That is because our brain associates these positive emotions we experience during such times with the game we played then. And when we think about this game later in life, our brain recalls these emotions due to the link it has formed. For example, I look very fondly back on games like Star Wars Battlefront 2 Classic Edition or Skyrim, as those are linked to great times I had when I grew up. But this conditioning also goes the other way with negative emotions, because games can also help to alleviate stress and help a person through tough times. With fitting examples coming from people on Reddit. Agitated Tomato 2671 wrote that Persona 5 prevented him from killing himself and helped with his hopelessness and depression in life. In the same way, Final Fantasy X helped Flaming Nomad with depression, while Ni no Kuni helped Still Has a Wii U in not getting overwhelmed with the emotions caused by the death of his dad. Or, as Dogmeat20 and OK Experience 667 point towards From Software Souls games, helping them through dark times. Whether they are positive or negative emotions, this plays a massive role in how a person perceives and thinks about any game they played. This emotional conditioning also manifests more concretely in the following three factors, which I argue are the core concepts that warp our perception of games towards subjectivity. For example, the biggest one for why we tend to believe that older games are way better than any other modern game is nostalgia. When you think about your childhood and the games you have played then, you look back fondly onto them, as when you came back home from school, you fired up your console and spent hours playing these games. And you could enjoy those hours as no background thoughts such as, oh, I should work out, have to cook and eat soon, so that I can get early to bed and get up early for my +1 hour commute to spend 8 hours at my boring ass job, so that I can scrap by and rinse and repeat until I retire or die. Due to this difference in circumstances, the carefree and fun times you had as a kid are the positive emotions warping your perception of the games you have played back then, making you look back fondly onto them, as your brain has conditioned you to associate your positive childhood feelings with the games you played as a child, resulting in the nostalgic attachment we have to games, which not only warps our views on them, but makes us also blind to any potential flaws. Because the emotions our brains associate with them essentially overpower any objective perception we might try to have. As such, if you played Star Wars Battlefront 2, GTA San Andreas, any Nintendo IP, or really any game around the 90s to the 2000s, you will look fondly back on them and most certainly ignore any flaws someone who hasn't played them as a kid might point out to you, giving you what is commonly referred to as rose-colored glasses when it comes to our favorite childhood games due to the emotions our brains associate with them. And this effect is exponentially more potent if you experience sad games during your childhood in key formative moments. Such key formative moments being spending time with your lifelong childhood friends playing these games, which is another psychological factor known as social bonding or social facilitation. In the same way, you associate high amounts of positive emotions with games you played during your childhood all the way to your teen years, so too is it the case if you played them with others. When playing games with friends, this can foster strong emotional memories, as shared experiences, cooperation, and fun create bonds between us. This in turn creates links in your brain between how it felt to hop into a voice call with your boys after school, to play games like Halo, Minecraft, or Raid together in WoW. The social element adds an extra layer of emotional depth to such experiences and makes you associate great times with your friends to particular games. In other words, those online gaming sessions as teens in Xbox lobbies, filled with the most batshit insane animal depraved talk, is another reason why you look so fondly back onto AutoCAD games, for example, and consider them to be better than any other recent games. As no doubt, they played an important role in helping us escape from difficult times back then, which is the final psychological factor that influences our choice for the greatest game of all times: escapism and emotional support. Games can offer a form of emotional support or a place to escape to during tough times, as they trick your brain in forgetting your current struggles in life by creating a feeling of safety and comfort. This reliance to escape from your problems and deal with them later can lead to emotional attachments, as these games we played during such difficult times become associated with feelings of relief. That is because of the way games are designed to interact with our brains. Games are created to provide quick feedback and rewards, which triggers our brain to release dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that makes us feel a sense of pleasure and accomplishment, acting as a natural countermeasure to an overwhelming amount of negative emotions. Through gaming, the release of dopamine helps to restore emotional balance by offsetting negativity with feelings of satisfaction and progress, resulting in a significant improvement to our mental state. As such, games are restful bonfire places we can catch breaks at before getting overwhelmed by having to face the next challenging boss in our life. With that said, all of these effects highlight how emotional experiences and memories can become deeply intertwined with gaming and, by extension, how we perceive games, leading to lasting emotional connections, which makes us believe these were the greatest games of all times and nothing could ever come close to them. That is why it is impossible to ever reach a consensus on what the greatest game of all times is. Because our emotional experiences, even when we all play the same game at once, will differ significantly based on where we are and what we are currently going through in life. And even attempting to create an objective ranking system is a fool's errand, as bias will inevitably influence any ranking and turning it subjective. With the perfect example here for being Metacritic and looking at its greatest games of all times list. This page is primarily dominated by older games, which further supports my prior points on what shapes our perception of the greatest games of all times. As such, a lot of nostalgia, social bonding, and escapism are influencing this ranking here, with Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time being ranked as number 1. And truth be told, I never played that game and have absolutely no interest in it. Showing again how our emotional attachment to a game changes how we perceive it, as I only see a dated retro game here and nothing more. Also, on a side note, it's a fucking travesty that RDR2 is so low on this list, only on 9th place, and Elden Ring is at 26. And how come that the house in Fata Morgana dreams of the Revenants or NFL 2K1 outrank Elden Ring? Dude, who the actual fuck thinks that those are better games? Anyway, as it is obvious by now, every gamer thinks that their chosen games are the greatest of all time. However, I believe we can still reach a consensus on the greatest game of all time if we can agree on the criteria that a game must fulfill for the spot. Which is why I propose the following criteria that a game has to fulfill to be recognized, in my eyes, as the greatest of all times. And straight up, also why Elden Ring is worthy of this title. The first one is that the game has to be highly creative and at the same time iconic. It is extremely easy to rehash already existing ideas and just recreate them in a new, uninspired 3D world and call it a day. Of which the most telling examples are the yearly sports game releases like FIFA and NFL, but also shooters like COD, Battlefield, etc. By process of elimination, this limits the entire gaming genre to fantasy settings, since they have the highest chances of being truly iconic and massively distinct from one another. However, even within this genre, we cannot treat them all the same, as Tolkien, with his Lord of the Rings books, essentially created the fantasy setting from scratch. With him having given us the fantasy races of orcs, elves, dwarves, etc. This in turn narrows down our selection of potential games even further, as most games have at least one of these races in their games, leaving us with, at best, only a handful of titles that could truly be considered original in every aspect. But this is where Elden Ring shines as a prime example for its creativity and uniqueness. Not only isn't it relying on the default fantasy tropes, but its creativeness extends to the entire world we explore. If I had to pick the most recognizable icon of the game, it has to be the Earth Tree. A tree that can even be recognized by people who haven't played the game. But this is just the most obvious example. In fact, the game has countless iconic areas and moments. Take seeing Caelid for the first time after being forcefully transported to it as another memorable experience. Or entering Limgrave and seeing this giant world opening up before us. In a similar vein is reaching Felm Azula, as you wouldn't have noticed this legacy dungeon if you didn't explore every nook and cranny of the open world. And seeing it is definitely one of the biggest what the fuck moments in the game. Just like discovering the Elden Beast being the final boss of the base game, questioning what even is it that you fight and, moreover, where exactly. There are still countless others like finding and exploring the underground area for the first time, or entering the Wadan festival and fighting a boss in a raid mode with many other NPCs. And with the DLC, this theme from the base game continues with stuff like entering the Graveside Plains and seeing the Shadow Tree for the first time, discovering the Finger Wounds, as well as entering Meteor's boss arena and asking yourself just into what kind of eldritch dimension you stepped into just now. Or take finding the Shaman Village and hitting you with countless emotions that essentially stun-lock you into wanting to spend a long time here. All of these iconic moments are all in just one singular game, with many other similar games only having a fraction of them, making Elden Ring not only highly memorable, but it also showcases how beautiful this world in all of its aspects is without having to rely on ultra-realistic graphics. With all of these iconic scenes, areas, and boss designs, it is undeniable that Elden Ring is a highly creative work that cements itself as a very iconic world and universe, which lends itself to a world with characters that are memorable and not easily forgettable. Case being with Egon, culminating in a great climax for the build-up when trying to reach the mountain peak. Or Rani's complex questline, giving us arguably the best ending and reward, as well as the best waifu for us maidenless boys. But despite all of its creativity and uniqueness, if you're forced to play a game during a particular time or era to fully enjoy it, then it never was that great to begin with. The reality is that some games can only be fully appreciated if you experience them around the time of their release. A perfect example being OG Doom, which was extremely unique and essentially invented the FPS gaming genre. But it now pales in comparison to its modern installments or any other modern FPS. And it really is a tough sale to ask someone today to play it if they aren't into retro or arcade games. A more recent example is also Skyrim. Back 13 years ago, it was the king of RPGs, as everyone played it non-stop and we all agreed that it was a revolutionary masterpiece for its time. But nowadays, you can only play it with having 100 mods installed alongside it, changing it effectively into a vastly different game. What I'm trying to say here is that in order for a game to be considered timeless, you shouldn't have to be forced to play it when it was just released to fully enjoy it. Instead, it should be enjoyable to play no matter when you play it. And a perfect example for a timeless game is, funnily enough, Dark Souls 1. I come back to play it every 1 to 2 years. When compared to later games with similar combat, like the newer God of War installments or its spiritual successors, it actually still holds up pretty well. Its gameplay, quest design and world building are still top-notch, with not many games after its release being its equal or outright better than it. However, it did age in its graphics quite a bit, which isn't as jarring as even older games, but if it weren't for how well the game is designed and plays, then it would be a completely different story. With Elden Ring playing just like Dark Souls, but having expanded its gameplay with countless new features, whilst also having a great look overall, I think that it honestly doesn't matter if you play it today in 5, 10 or even 20 years. You will probably enjoy it just as much as if it was released as a new game if Dark Souls 1 is anything to go by. Though this is something only time will give us the final results for. But something Elden Ring isn't suffering from, compared to other older games, are its controls and gameplay. Games do greatly benefit of being developed today, where not only controls have been standardized for the most part, but accessibility features also exist to remap controls, and you have a great choice of selecting with what device you want to play a game with, which definitely beats any older game from this list here. Unless of course you use emulators, allowing you to fix some of their dogshit controls. Combined with how smooth the code for Elden Ring runs on every platform it's out on, it has the advantage of having been developed for a generation of gaming devices that pretty much already perfected the way in which we play games nowadays, allowing, as such, for a smooth gaming experience from a technical perspective, but the same also applies to its actual gameplay. Although the bosses, combat system and art direction are From Software's greatest as of now, its arguably most compelling point is the sense of discovery. Unlike in 98% of all other open world games, there are not only merits to explore the lands between and its secret areas, but also great gameplay incentives. As diving into any dungeon will definitely reward you with new items that can contribute to creating a broke build or give you new lore to learn about the history of the world. Though arguably its biggest draw is discovering the hidden areas in the game, like entering the underground areas for the first time, setting foot into Moonlight Altar, or reaching the Halic Tree. These moments definitely give you this wowing feeling that you have just now discovered something truly magical. An emotion that even after 2 years is still burnt into my memory. As a result, these memories and experiences you make when playing this game blind and discovering everything on your own is what ultimately fuels the escapism factor and makes you consider Elden Ring as the GOAT. Because From Software definitely created a truly unique and highly immersive world, which is in part the direct result of the man who directed this game, Hidetaka Miyazaki, a man who throughout all of his games constantly had a strong vision of what his games should be. And a man with a strong vision is arguably the most important factor when determining the greatest game of all times. After all, the vision determines the overall quality of the game. It directs the entire game creation process from the messages and themes of its story all the way to how these aspects are reflected in its gameplay. A perfect example for the importance of a vision is Metal Gear Solid 2. In recent times, this game had a resurgence in popularity due to its profound ideas. To not spoil it too much, as you should definitely play the game for yourself, it essentially predicted the modern landscape of the internet. How with the help of AI, and information warfare and distortion of truth allows for parties to control narratives and public opinions on any topics they wish. Something that is applicable with gaming journalism, becoming more of an activist propaganda instead of actually writing about facts and making unbiased reports for gamers. If you are familiar with the IGN incident of them falsely reporting on Black Myth Wukong's developer Game Science, then you already know what I mean. IGN accused them of bad conduct and a horrible work environment, which every other gaming outlet reported as well, without checking their sources and discovering that the IGN reporter relied on horrendously false translations to write this article. Something gamers quickly figured out instead of believing this report. But still, with the improvements in deepfakes and sophistication of bots, the future MGS2 predicted is not only almost here, but also rapidly manifesting itself, making an already good game like MGS2 even more relevant today due to the vision it was created with. As such, thanks to Miyazaki and his strong vision for Elden Ring, that was made real thanks to the goated team under him, who definitely spent more than a couple of nights sleeping under their work desks, is what ultimately was the driving force to create this masterpiece. It was his vision that allowed From Software to create this immersive world with its countless challenges to overcome. And by continuing its trend of being a therapy session in disguise since Dark Souls 1, the vision of the world and how it treats us, the player, never changed and instead improved with every subsequent later game. While all of these 4 criteria are a must for me to consider a game as the GOAT, we also have to consider the timing in which Elden Ring released, as it didn't play a too insignificant part in its success. Because it was released during the pandemic, where everyone was still at home for almost 24/7, it allowed for a lot of people to play the game who didn't have anything else to do. And by continuing the Soulsborne series trend of being a therapy session in disguise, the effect Elden Ring had on those during that critical time is what also played a part in its massive success, as it not only provided great escapism for anyone playing it, but also emotional support as well as a social bonding opportunity if you've played it alongside your friends. Also, if you want to hear a full deep dive into how Dark Souls and Elden Ring are therapy sessions, subscribe to my channel, as this will be a topic I dedicate an entire video to in the future. In conclusion, From Software's vision of how they create their games, essentially rejecting any trend other bigger developers are chasing without thinking, as well as their decade of experiences, along with the opportune timing of Elden Ring's release, is ultimately why I believe that Elden Ring is the greatest game of all time and nothing can hope to topple it anytime soon. Their mindset, spearheaded by the president Miyazaki, is the reason as to why they are an insane powerhouse in the gaming industry right now and also for the following years to come. Yet deciding on the greatest game of all time is undeniably a very subjective choice and a topic for which there will never be a consensus on, due to the various psychological factors we have looked at, causing people to have vastly different emotions and memories towards the same game. With the only criteria I can think of to spark a meaningful discussion about the greatest game of all time being iconic, highly creative, timeless, and having exceptional gameplay and vision. However, I hope that you will at least agree with me on the point that when looking at this game, its impact it had on many gamers and how it fulfills all of my criteria for what makes a game the greatest of all time, Elden Ring is a strong contender for the GOAT title.